I'm going to start with COVID restrictions. That's what gets our listeners all in a tiz. The lifting of COVID restrictions. Look, it looks like Boris is rolling these out a month in advance and saying, my language, certainly not his bluster, enough is enough. Is this some sort of distraction, do you think, Benjamin, away from his, to say the very least, horrors that he's facing on the domestic front?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, here is a man who was not following the COVID rules, was breaching them left, right and centre, so far as we can see from the 16 reported parties. And now he wants to get rid of all the restrictions because, of course, it's less toxic to be a hypocrite if you're removing the rules from everyone else. It makes them, I think, less aware of it. And so that's why he's brought it forward. I think it was no coincidence that when a health minister announced that she had breached self-isolation rules, just a few hours later, they said, we'll get rid of self-isolation rules on the 24th of February.
Right.
Now, am I going to lose sleep about some of the things like masks going in the coming months? No, I don't think they're making that big a difference at this stage of the pandemic.
You used to swear by the masks.
But we're moving on, and actually it frustrates me where some people...
I want to play back some of the things you said. Dawn is right. I mean, could it not be a less cynical person saying, well, it's got nothing to do with the woes he's got in his party and the parties, but the fact that none of this stuff worked in the first place, and, you know, when the facts change, he changes. What do you do? Dawn Neesom, what would you do?
Quite a lot. You know what, Rob? I don't care why he's getting rid of the restrictions. I'm just glad he is. It might be the dead cat or the dead dog or whatever it was thrown on the table to distract us all, but I really don't care. Most of the stuff was nonsensical in the first place. It was not only nonsensical, it was absolutely cruel. Keeping families apart. Sort of like this enforced mask wearing of little kids so their education is ruined. Keeping kids at home for the whole time. Right. Stopping them playing sports. Stopping them going to the gym. But allowing pizza deliveries. It was absolutely insane, nonsensical.
Were you smiling there? But I remember you saying this was the most popular public policy since the NHS. No?
And that was a direct quote.
I was just thinking that not going to the gym but getting pizza deliveries is my life regardless of COVID. I mean, but that was a statement of fact.
Benjamin.
In April 2020, it was the most popular policy a government had introduced since the Second World War. So that's a statement. But look, when people seem to think that I've somehow undermined my past positions by changing my mind, that's because we're in a fundamentally different position. And the stupid thing to do would be to say that you still had to lock down now when we've got vaccines and treatments and a less dangerous version of COVID. I'm delighted that's happened. But what they shouldn't get rid of is the self-isolation period if you test positive.
Well, why?
Because, you know what, who wants to, if I was here and obviously I haven't, but if I just tested positive, would you really want me sat in front of you in the workplace?
Well, what's the difference between that and some people would argue, bearing in mind the mortality rate, let's say if you've been jabbed, is about the same or less than the flu. You could show up to work with the flu or a cold, might not want you to, so what difference?
Well, I think one of the problems that is raised by getting rid of the legal self-isolation period is that you already had people that were pressured to go to work by their bosses or for financial reasons, and now it's going to become a lot easier for people who even feel sick, who maybe are at risk of getting more poorly. It's going to be a lot easier for bosses to take advantage of those people.
Well, can I just say something? I'm not sure if you feel like this, Dawn. You know, I have to say, barristers, no one's doing a fun run for them. I was a criminal barrister and made certainly in some years less than a bus driver, to say the very least, at the criminal bar. And, you know, as a self-employed person, one of the things I can tell you about self-employed people is they're never ill and never had a day off.
No, quite.
Right, Dawn?
Yeah, never. Mind you, when I was working on the newspaper, never ill, never had a day off. I worked through pneumonia twice, which was stupid, but I did it. But I wasn't going to put anyone else at risk. You know what gets me, Rob, now is sort of like Benjamin's not alone in this. The amount of people that were panicking and scaremongering and deliberately terrifying in the media and newspapers, deliberately terrifying people. Stay home, save the NHS, wear a mask, don't go out. Who are now saying, well, it was all a bit harsh, wasn't it? I always thought that, but I just like to say, there's so many people doing that.
Do you think that that's true?
Well, I didn't say that. I said that now we don't need those things, not that we didn't need them 1 year ago. I think one of the reasons why Partygate has been so toxic for Boris Johnson is that although about 70% of people agreed with the lockdowns when they were happening, there is a collective trauma. And as people emerge from it, even if they agreed at the time, they are now dealing with the consequences of it, whether it's, to their businesses, to their families, or to their emotional stability. And I think that's been projected on Boris Johnson because of his breaches.
Partygate being toxic, to say the very least. It's fundamentally about corruption and being a rule maker and a rule breaker. And I saw an ex-friend of mine, Matt Hancock, dancing with his new girlfriend at the Brits the other day. I mean, yeah, I'm going to keep judiciously silent on that. But one of the things that I do think, it is interesting is John Major, whose government, as you know, was pretty much, amongst other things, certainly had the challenge of a new kind of Blair wave of New Labour, but it was also brought down in the 90s after he went back to basics and was quite literally drowning in sleaze. So what moral authority does he have to come out and say, frankly, that Boris Johnson should go, in effect? That's really what he was doing in the mindful way he did, but sticking the knife in and saying, a prime minister that doesn't have integrity is somebody that should go.
I mean, look, first of all, obviously I don't remember the Major government because I was born partway through it. But look, I think there is a difference.
It's amazing all that party can have on someone, really, but I can say... No, I'm just saying it could be the unsympathetic lighting. I thought you were about my age.
I thought he was older.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've not had as much Botox, I suppose, so it might be that.
Meow.
Do carry.
Well, maybe you should.
Look, I think the difference here is that clearly John Major's government, and indeed himself, as it would turn out, having had an affair, was dogged by sleaze. But the difference was that they were condemned for it. There were consequences for it. Indeed, they lost every election going in the last couple of years. The difference now is that Boris Johnson seems to ignore the consequences, to try and escape them, to try and act as though it's normal. And I think that's far more dangerous for a civilised society.
Can I ask you, let's stay on the topic, because what you just said is very important politically, that back in the doorsteps, and I do remember I was at university at that point, that a lot of people, when they were canvassing for the Conservative Party at that point, sleaze was a central issue. We do have an election coming up, and we will have a general election. Don't you think that people may not vote Conservative? Doesn't mean they're necessarily going to vote Labour on the basis of exactly what you're talking about.
I mean, the polling says that about half of people that voted Conservative last time are not sure they'll vote Conservative next time, but only 10% have said they'll switch to Labour. Now, the truth is that when people get angry at scandals like this or midway through parliaments, they often say they'll never vote for the party again. They almost certainly do vote for the party again. And I think there is a cultural divide that is leaving lots of traditional Labour voters reluctant to vote Labour. And Boris Johnson knows that, and he knows that at least for one more election, the Tories are pretty safe,
What's
I think.
that cultural divide? What is the cultural divide?
Well, it's the one that came from Brexit, and it's the small c conservatism that defines a certain type of Labour voter that has switched to the Tories in the last election. And I think that's why it's dangerous, because Boris can get away with all sorts of things because he knows those people will probably still come back to it.
Yeah, they will. Because there is no opposition. This is the problem you've got. And the last by-election, really, in theory, it should have hugely swung to Labour. But it didn't. It got the Lib Dems in, didn't it? And it's because no one voted for the Lib Dems because no one even knows who they are, where they are, or what their policies are. But it was like a knee-jerk. Well, I can't vote Conservative, but I can't vote Labour because I don't even know what they stand for either. So that is where we are at the moment. But I mean, going back to John Major, I mean, it was probably the most disastrous PM ever, wasn't it? I mean, it's like his back to basics misfired incredibly. It's like back to the bedroom.